Hello everyone and welcome. It's now just 11 p.m. in Tokyo, Japan. So good morning, good afternoon and good evening to you, and welcome to the first global OIE webinar to celebrate World Wildlife Day. My name is Lisa Thompson and I am a Regional Project Officer at the OIE Regional Representation for Asia and the Pacific, based in Tokyo. Today, we want to focus on connecting wildlife health stakeholders globally, and it's great to see so many young professionals with us. We have a packed schedule for today's webinar, so let's crack on. If we just go through some housekeeping, first of all, perhaps could I go back? We have two slides back, and we'll just mention the privacy policy for the OIE is available in more detail online, and also for the general data protection regulation details. The link for both of those is at the bottom. Next slide, and next slide, please. Okay, so if you're joining us on Zoom, I'm sure most of you are quite familiar, but just a little bit of orientation for Zoom, first of all. If I could have the Zoom slide. Could I have the housekeeping slide, please? Thank you. If you could keep yourselves on mute unless we request you to intervene, that would be great. If you want to turn on your video, then please do so. You can also rename yourself using the button beside your image. We have interpretation for this meeting in English, French and Spanish, and the interpretation symbol is at the bottom of your screen. Please do use that and select the language that you would wish to join us in. If you have any comments or questions, you can let us know using the Zoom chat function. And if I go to the next slide, please. We do really want to hear from you. We'll also be using Mentimeter. We've got the link in the chat box, and also you can use this QR code, and you can join at any time during the presentations and post your comments and questions and let us know what you think of the webinar so far. We'd love to hear your questions. It is easier for us if you can share them in English, but if they're in another language, we'll do our best to interpret those. Most of our speakers are joining for at least one of the sessions today. I see quite a few with us already now, so we'll try and answer your questions, but it does depend a little on their time zone. If you have a question for a particular speaker, then please mention their name with the question. If you're already connected to Mentimeter, great. Otherwise, please do join us and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. The easiest way is to use the QR code there. So just hold your phone up and take a photo of the QR code, and it should hopefully recognize and take you through to the link directly where you can join Mentimeter. Otherwise, you can go to menti.com and enter the code, but we can hopefully find you there a little bit later on. Okay, if I just go to the next slide, please. I'm honoured to start our presentations by introducing a special message from world-renowned ethologist and conservationist Dr. Jane Goodall. In the last 6 decades, her research has transformed scientific perceptions of the relationship between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom. And today, her mission has evolved into a quest to empower every individual to make the world a better place for people, other animals, and the planet we share. Dr. Goodall is the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, a global leader in chimpanzee and habitat protection. Jane is a United Nations Messenger of Peace and Dame of the British Empire. And it brings me great pleasure to welcome her now to the virtual stage. Thank you.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall. Thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you. As you all know, we're living in dark times, politically, socially, and especially environmentally, where we're faced with the twin threats of climate change and loss of biodiversity. And we're also battling with a pandemic. And all of this, of course, we brought upon ourselves by our disrespect of nature and animals. It's so important to realize that we're part of and depend on the natural world for clean air, water, food, well, everything. But it's healthy ecosystems that we depend on. In the forests of Gombe, I learned how everything was interconnected, each plant and animal species playing its role. And as more species become locally extinct, this can have a devastating effect on the whole ecosystem and may in fact lead to ecosystem collapse. People are finally waking up to the damage we're inflicting on the planet. There are rewilding programs in many countries, and sometimes species that have become locally extinct have been successfully reintroduced. The best example of how the reintroduction of key species can regenerate a damaged ecosystem is provided by the reintroduction of wolves and bison into the Yellowstone area. I suspect most of you are familiar with that story. It's a wonderful story. As well, people are starting to realize how industrial agriculture, especially factory farms, is devastating the environment and causing massive loss of biodiversity. The need for regenerative farming, permaculture, and so on is becoming more widely recognized. When I began the chimp research in 1960, the Gombe National Park was part of the Great Forest Belt that stretched across equatorial Africa. But when I flew over the area in the late 1980s, I was shocked to see the park was just a tiny island of forest surrounded by bare hills. There were more people living there than the land could support. They were cutting down trees to get more land for farming or to make money from charcoal or timber. They were desperately trying to live. And I realized if we didn't help them to find ways of living without destroying their environment, we couldn't save chimps, forests, or anything else. This led to the very holistic program that we called Takari, that began in 1994. From the start, we worked with village leaders to improve health and education facilities and to regenerate the degraded farmland without the use of chemical pesticides and herbicides. And we provided microcredit opportunities for villagers to start their own environmentally sustainable small businesses. And we provided scholarships for girls so that women had a chance for secondary education. Once people realized that we cared about them and that protecting the environment is not only for wildlife but also their own health and future, they became our partners in conservation. They've stopped farming on the steep slopes and greatly reduced erosion. They've also reduced cutting down of trees, and gradually trees have grown back from seeds and roots that were left in the ground, and insects, birds and mammals have returned. We use the Takari method of community-led conservation in 6 other African countries where we work. Our research team at Gombe includes a veterinarian, and we monitor the health of not only the chimpanzees and baboons, but also of the people and livestock in the surrounding villages. In other words, we've been employing the One Health concept that formalizes what has long been known, that animal health, human health, and the health of the environment are interdependent, and the health of one affects the health of all. For example, streams contaminated with pathogens from human or livestock in the villages flow through the national park and pose health hazards for both animals and humans working in the park. Some animals, such as baboons and bush pigs, may move out of the park to raid crops, and they may infect domestic animals. As you all know, more than 70% of all new human diseases are zoonotic in origin. And it's not only that viruses, bacteria, and so on can spill over to humans, where they may create new diseases, such as HIV, AIDS, Ebola, MERS, avian influenza, and almost certainly COVID-19. But this can also work the other way around, with human pathogens spilling over to animals. Gorillas and chimpanzees, with their close genetic makeup to humans, are particularly susceptible to human diseases, and they should be treated with extra care by veterinary services, wildlife authorities, and researchers. And of course, this applies to orangutans and to a lesser extent other primates too. And finally, wild animals can infect domestic animals and vice versa. The treatment of disease in wild animals has become increasingly important, especially for those species which are so endangered and breed slowly. And I want to recognize the part played by a number of the best zoos, because they provide veterinarians with the opportunity to work with captive wild animals and then share their knowledge with vets working in the field. And very often they train those vets in the zoo. Obviously, as human populations move ever further into wildlife habitat, taking their livestock and dogs with them, it's increasingly important for collaboration between veterinarians who are working with domestic animals and those working with wildlife, and doctors, human doctors, who are treating diseases that can infect both humans and animals, clearly need to collaborate with veterinarians working with domestic and or wild animals. The OIE Wildlife Health Framework is working within the human-animal ecosystem interface to study animal pathogens, detect and manage wildlife disease, and share information with the relevant people in an effort to reduce the risk of further spillovers to humans. Finally, I hope that this conference will be very successful and provide a wonderful opportunity for sharing information to the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Some very thought-provoking and very relevant comments there from Dr. Goodall. Thank you very much for sharing the message. Our next suite of presentations moves on from that. Dr. Goodall mentioned the OIE and the Wildlife Health Framework. So now we're going to shine the spotlight on the OIE. Oh, I've just been sent a message that we're just going to remind you to check on Mentimeter. So check using this code, or the code is in the chat box. I'll just leave that up for a few seconds if you want to join. So either using this code or, oh, okay. So if I could just have the speakers and I'll introduce them, please. Wonderful, thank you. So I'm delighted to have colleagues from the OIE joining to share some key information about the organisation. Our first speaker is Dr. Keith Hamilton, who is the head of the Preparedness and Resilience Department at OIE headquarters in Paris. Keith will give us an introduction to the OIE Wildlife Health Programme. Next up, we'll hear from Dr. Mariana Delgado about wildlife health surveillance worldwide. Mariana is currently an intern at the Preparedness and Resilience Department, also at headquarters. And our final introductory session presentation will be given by Dr. Jacinth Grima. He is the project officer, the regional coordinator for the EBO-SARSI project based at the OIE Regional Representation for Africa in Bamako. Jacinth will talk to us about early detection systems for wildlife. So I'll pass over to them to give you some more information. Thank you.
So happy Wildlife Day. My name is Keith Hamilton. I'm head of the Preparedness and Resilience Department at OIE's headquarters in Paris, France. I'm a veterinarian, originally from Jersey in the Channel Islands, which is part of the UK. Today, I'd like to try and describe why wildlife health is important, identify some of the challenges that we face today, and also talk about some of the actions that OIE is taking to address wildlife health. Before I start, I'd like to thank Mariana Delgado for these wonderful slides that she's prepared for me to support the presentation. So, why is the OIE concerned about wildlife health? Well, we should all be concerned about wildlife, but we need to be more than just concerned. We need to act to preserve wildlife health and biodiversity. And why? Well, in a nutshell, wildlife is essential for life on Earth. Our health, the health of all animals, and the health of the environment depends on having a healthy and balanced ecosystem. This ecosystem depends on wildlife health and biodiversity. Here are a few examples. Bats and bees are essential pollinators. Small mammals maintain soil health. Coral reefs maintain an incredibly diverse and rich ecosystem which produces oxygen and captures carbon. Fruit eaters disperse seeds, and predators control the populations of other species. Wildlife are valuable assets for many communities across the world. Wildlife support the lives and livelihoods, either as a source of food, think of all the people who depend on fishing or hunting to live, or as a source of income. Again, think about the importance of wildlife tourism. Think how many countries depend on safaris or other forms of wildlife tourism for a large part of their economy. Wildlife is also very important for our mental, social, and spiritual well-being. It's hard to measure in units, but wildlife make us happy. The joy we get from hearing or seeing birds, other wildlife, even in a city. The joy we get diving and exploring coral reefs. Wildlife provide happiness to people across the planet. For any of you who have children, and for all of you who were children, you'll know that stories about wildlife played a very important role in your upbringing, your education, connecting us with nature and providing us with social values. And as we get older, stories about wildlife, metaphors, provide us and support us with our philosophical and spiritual education. Just imagine a world without wildlife. It would be bleak, it would be a dystopian nightmare. Some facts help to highlight some of the challenges that we currently face. 88.8% of species on Earth are animal species. The animal kingdom is the most biodiverse kingdom on the planet. But in the last 50 years, an average of 68% decrease in population sizes of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles and fish has been reported. 40% of the world's amphibians, 25% of its mammals and 14% of its birds are threatened with extinction. It's staggering to think of how much damage has been done in such a short period of time. Humans and animals, both domestic and wild, share their ecosystem with a multitude of microorganisms, viruses, protozoa, bacteria, fungi. And these microorganisms also provide essential support to the ecosystem. They are part of the ecosystem, like humans and animals. A tiny proportion of these microorganisms are harmful and can cause human or animal disease. We call these microorganisms pathogens. The discovery of pathogens as a cause of the disease is relatively new. We've only really known that pathogens are responsible for causing infectious disease for just over 100 years, thanks to the German microbiologist Robert Koch. But it's not just the pathogens that are responsible for disease. Infectious disease results from a complex interaction between the host, you, me, or a wild animal or a domestic animal, the pathogen, and the environment. Over the past century, we've been able to detect emerging disease events. We've been able to detect pathogens with greater capacity as time has evolved. Over the past century, we've detected a greater frequency of emerging disease events in both humans and animals. Well-known examples include HIV, SARS, some strains of influenza such as bird flu, and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. These are well-known emerging diseases in humans, but there have also been many emerging diseases in animals which threaten their health and welfare, and also threaten biodiversity. We know that disease is a primary driver of wildlife population declines worldwide. So emerging disease events affect both humans and animals. We know that many emerging diseases in humans have an animal origin, but we also acknowledge that human activity is responsible for driving disease emergence. Factors such as climate change, wildlife trade, deforestation, and certain farming practices create the conditions for diseases to emerge. To take preventative action rather than reacting to disease events, we need to do something about the drivers of disease emergence. We need to maintain a healthy, balanced ecosystem, and we need to use our valuable resources more sustainably. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us about the potential losses from infectious diseases, the devastating impact on humanity, the deaths and the suffering, and also the economic losses, which also result in suffering for many people, particularly the most vulnerable people. There are plenty of academic studies that highlight that it's more effective, more cost-effective to take preventative action rather than to react once a disease has emerged. Now, cost-benefit studies are very important because that is what decision makers and politicians listen to. So we know that we need to address the drivers of disease emergence. We also know that we shouldn't blame wildlife for emerging diseases. They're also victims. Emerging diseases also threaten animals and biodiversity. So what is the OIE and what can it do? The OIE is the international organisation with the mandate to improve animal health and welfare, including wildlife health. It has 182 member countries and was established in 1924, over 20 years before the UN or WHO. The OIE recognises that the health of humans, animals and the environment are inextricably linked, and therefore the health of our planet depends on action being taken across all of these sectors: public health, animal health, and environmental health. And we call this concept One Health. The OIE sets out to protect wildlife health to achieve One Health through a coordinated set of actions. This is the goal of our wildlife health programme. And because wildlife health is a collective responsibility involving multiple sectors and disciplines, to implement its wildlife health programme, the organisation is working closely with international partners working in agriculture, conservation, public health, and the environment. And action is needed at all levels, at global level, regional level, national level, and community level. Community level is particularly important because this is where things happen. But coordination at national, regional, and international level is incredibly important to make sure that we all work towards the same goals and that we take the best approaches to reach those goals that are based on science. Now, some of the activities that OIE is undertaking to address wildlife health include collecting, analysing and disseminating information on the global disease situation in wildlife, developing guidance to reduce the risk of disease spillover events, creating global networks of wildlife expertise, developing training and improving capacity. If you want to know more or work more closely with OIE, please contact me or one of my colleagues. In the meantime, happy Wildlife Day.
Hello, my name is Mariana Delgado. It's a pleasure to be here. And for this presentation, we are going to discuss about wildlife health surveillance around the globe. We are going to highlight some information from the 2021 OIE Wildlife Health Survey. So, arriving to the in-country wildlife disease surveillance survey, this survey was available on the 3 official languages of the OIE. It was composed of 9 sections, 54 questions, and was submitted by 103 of the members, the OIE members. The main objective of this survey is to better understand the OIE members' wildlife disease surveillance systems, including the reporting of diseases in country or in our system WAHIS, OIE WAHIS or OIE WAHIS Wild, the veterinary authority role related to legal and illegal wildlife trade, and other interesting topics that you will see when you read the report. The results of this survey will be used to inform the activities identified under the OIE focal point for wildlife and their partners on this thematic across the OIE regions. So let's see the current situation. By now, we have more than half, 54.4% of the countries that respond to have a wildlife disease surveillance program. And these programs have general surveillance and a targeted surveillance. So 94.6% of the countries have some kind of investigation of wildlife mortality whenever an event of wildlife mortality or morbidity appears. And also 85.7% of these countries have targeted surveillance. That means that the program includes testing of opportunistically collected or apparently healthy wildlife specimens for the research of a specific disease. In other numbers, 63.1% of the members, rather they have or not a program to wildlife disease surveillance. They have limitations or impediments whenever they have to collect, handle, or transport wildlife samples, and also when they have to analyze and get to a diagnosis. Nevertheless, some effort has been seen in this survey because 62.1% of the members maintains records from wildlife mortality or morbidity events. So somehow you have epidemiological surveillance. And also 66% of the countries respond to have implement a response to manage a wildlife health event. So yes, they are aware of the problem. So we are going to see how does the countries respond and manage a wildlife health event. So here we have question 7a. The question was, what types of responses has your country previously used or is using to manage a wildlife event? So we can see that the most used response by the countries is to remove the carcasses from the field to prevent the spread of diseases. The response is followed by the vaccination of domestic animals, then for enhanced biosecurity or livestock, public health measures, or fencing the domestic animals. As you will see, the first 5 responses of these cases and responses are focused on protecting the health of domestic animals and not focused on or concerned about the health of wild animals. So now that we know that they care about and they are doing some research, there are some programs, there are some efforts to respond whenever a wildlife health event happens. Now we are going to see how does the countries manage wildlife health. So for the lead, 47.5% of the countries said that the agency on the lead of management of wildlife health are the veterinary services, followed by the wildlife services, environmental services, and last but not least, national parks and protected areas. However, the source of information comes from another part. And this is where we have the information of wildlife health. The first agency in charge of wildlife health is the Agriculture Agency, followed by environmental agencies, and for some countries, academia. For some countries, academia can be really, really important as a source of information. And with all the lead, all the information, who is in charge of responding whenever an event happens? So it depends. It depends, and that's why we ask them these 3 questions, question 6a, 6b, and 6c. In this question, we ask them whenever there is a significant wildlife morbidity or mortality event within your country, will need to be informed. The difference between the question is that the first one applies just in diseases affecting only wildlife species. The second question is wildlife and domestic species, and the last one is whenever wildlife disease can have a zoonotical potential. So we may see that whenever the event affects only wildlife species or affects wildlife and domestic species, the one in charge of the response are the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Environment. However, whenever the event involves a disease that has a zoonotic potential, that means and can affect humans, the Agency of Public Health will be involved. And how does the OIE intervene on this problem? So the OIE has a role on wildlife health surveillance. We have the wildlife health framework. We also have a database, the OIE WAHIS, that allows the country to have transparency about diseases around the world and to be aware of wildlife diseases, and also codes and guidelines. So as a closure and not a conclusion, because you will have to read the report and you will see that there is a lot more of information. Today we have seen that 68% of the population side of wild vertebrate species has declined in the last 50 years. We've also seen that 71.8% of animal origin emerging infectious diseases that affect humans being has a wildlife origin. We have also seen that the in-country management of wildlife health used to be on charge of veterinary services for 47.5% of the countries. The veterinary services are the one on the lead. And the one on the lead of the source of information and the one who will respond whenever a wildlife health event are the agencies of agriculture and also environment. So we have seen the current situation of wildlife health surveillance, and we can say that we can all agree that wildlife health surveillance is really important for the preservation of wildlife. And for ending this presentation, I have to repeat that wildlife is essential for long-term preservation of human and animal health, and also their well-being, and wildlife is critically important for the integrity of every ecosystem. So to prevent an event and mitigate the current situation, wildlife health surveillance is essential, and that will be also essential for recovering key species and restore the ecosystems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bonjour, je suis Yacine Digma, je suis vétérinaire, coordonnateur technique du projet Evo-Circi et je suis basé à la représentation régionale de l'OIE pour l'Afrique à Bamako. C'est un réel plaisir pour moi d'échanger avec vous autour de cette thématique qui porte sur le système de détection précoce des maladies au sein de la faune sauvage. Donc déjà, la question fondamentale que nous devrions nous poser, c'est pourquoi mener une surveillance au niveau de la faune sauvage. Et ce qui est important de savoir, c'est que 3 des 4 pathogènes émergents responsables de maladies infectieuses chez les humains sont d'origine animale, donc des zoonoses. Et il a été également démontré que pour mener une lutte efficace des zoonoses au niveau des humains, il est plus facile et plus efficient de se pencher sur l'évolution de ces maladies au niveau des animaux, raison pour laquelle il est important de mener une surveillance de ces maladies au niveau de la faune sauvage. Donc, il y a en gros 4 objectifs pour ce qui concerne la surveillance au niveau de la faune sauvage. En l'absence de maladie, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est des activités de veille. Cette activité de veille va permettre effectivement d'identifier précocement les événements inhabituels afin de prendre toutes les dispositions nécessaires pour pouvoir circonscrire ce mal-là. Et également, ce qu'il faut faire en l'absence de maladie, il faut démontrer que la maladie est absente. Et de ce fait, il faut faire une enquête sérologique, faire des prélèvements et des analyses de labo pour effectivement prouver que la maladie est absente. Et en présence de maladie, il faut justement faire une surveillance de proximité, ce qui permettra en tout cas d'avoir une idée sur la prévalence de la maladie et de détecter rapidement les nouveaux cas afin de mettre en place tout ce qui est comme mesure conservatoire pour pouvoir circonscrire la maladie et par la suite procéder à son contrôle. Pour ce qui concerne les piliers de la surveillance, le premier pilier, c'est la détection. Mais il faut noter que cette détection doit être obligatoirement suivie d'une notification. La notification va nous permettre d'avoir toutes les données nécessaires pour pouvoir procéder à une analyse et à une interprétation. L'interprétation des données issues de cette notification va nous permettre certainement d'avoir tous les éléments nécessaires pour pouvoir procéder à une investigation. Et l'investigation va permettre de savoir de quoi il s'agit pour pouvoir en tout cas prendre des mesures idoines pour résoudre le problème. Et ce qui est important à ce niveau, c'est qu'après l'investigation, il faut toujours assurer un feedback, communiquer les résultats de l'investigation à l'ensemble des acteurs qui ont été à l'origine de la notification. Nous allons voir maintenant quelques types de surveillance applicables au niveau de la faune sauvage ainsi que leurs avantages et leurs inconvénients. La première surveillance applicable au sein de la faune sauvage, c'est la surveillance active et elle est basée sur la recherche active des pathogènes. Et comme avantage, c'est que cette surveillance permet en tout cas de détecter en tout cas des maladies sans pourtant observer des signes cliniques. Et l'inconvénient pour cette surveillance, c'est qu'elle ne permet pas de détecter des maladies exotiques, tout simplement parce que d'autres espèces n'ont pas été prises en compte au niveau de l'échantillonnage. Nous avons également la surveillance passive. Il faut dire que cette surveillance passive est la surveillance la plus utilisée et cette surveillance implique plusieurs acteurs, notamment les vétérinaires, les agents de santé humaine, les agents de santé environnementale. Et comme avantage pour cette surveillance, c'est qu'elle permet de couvrir une large proportion de la population cible et comme avantage aussi, cette surveillance permet quand même d'impliquer un certain nombre d'acteurs, en tout cas pluridisciplinaires dans cette surveillance. L'inconvénient pour la surveillance passive, c'est qu'il y aura certainement une sous-notification, tout simplement parce que certains cycles cliniques ou certaines maladies vont passer entre les mains des acteurs. Et comme inconvénient aussi, c'est que cette surveillance expose potentiellement, en tout cas, les acteurs à des zoonoses. Il y a la surveillance intégrée aussi qui peut être menée au sein de la faune sauvage et l'avantage de cette surveillance intégrée là, c'est que c'est l'esprit One Health qui est mis en avant parce que nous avions des acteurs de la santé humaine, de la santé animale et également des acteurs de la santé environnementale. Et comme inconvénient, c'est que bon, compte tenu de la diversité des agents qui sont impliqués dans cette surveillance, ça va nécessiter beaucoup de formations qui engendrera d'énormes coûts. Pour ce qui concerne les difficultés liées à la surveillance au sein de la faune sauvage, nous avions premièrement le manque d'informations sur la taille des animaux sauvages, leur répartition géographique. Et la deuxième difficulté aussi, c'est que certaines enquêtes nécessitent la capture de ces animaux sauvages-là, qui est souvent très pénible. Et également, certaines enquêtes nécessitent un suivi de ces animaux sauvages-là. Donc, cela est assez difficile au sein de la faune sauvage. Et comme dernière difficulté, nous avions cette large diversité des espèces au sein de la faune sauvage. Je vais vous présenter brièvement le projet Evo Sursis. C'est un projet qui a démarré en 2017 et qui prend fin en 2023. Il est financé par l'Union européenne et ce projet est exécuté dans 10 pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest et d'Afrique centrale. Le projet est piloté par l'OIE en collaboration avec des instituts de recherche, notamment l'Institut Pasteur, le CIRAD et l'IRD. Donc le projet a 3 principaux piliers. Le premier pilier, c'est le renforcement de la surveillance à travers les activités de formation. Le deuxième, c'est tout ce qui est sensibilisation, communication autour des fièvres hémorragiques. Et le dernier pilier, c'est le renforcement des protocoles de surveillance à travers les activités de recherche. Pour ce qui concerne les activités de sensibilisation et de communication, il faut noter que depuis le début du projet dans les années 2017, plus de 1000 personnes ont été touchées par ces activités de sensibilisation et de communication. Et les communautés qui sont vraiment ciblées sont celles qui sont à proximité des réserves ou des parcs fauniques où on peut avoir des animaux sauvages. Et ces activités de communication visent en tout cas à faire comprendre à ces communautés ce que c'est que les zoonoses et également les pratiques, les conduites à tenir pour pouvoir éviter ces zoonoses-là. Il y a également le jeu Sérieux Alerte qui a été développé par le projet suivant l'approche One Health, et ce jeu prend en compte l'ensemble des acteurs qui sont impliqués dans la chaîne de surveillance des maladies. Et l'objectif de ce jeu, c'est d'amener l'ensemble des acteurs à connaître leur rôle dans la chaîne de transmission de l'information zoosanitaire afin d'assurer une alerte précoce. Dans le cadre des activités de recherche, le projet, à travers ses partenaires scientifiques, ont pu effectuer plus de 12 000 prélèvements chez des animaux sauvages et un peu plus de 1000 chez des animaux domestiques. Et ces partenaires de recherche ont pu développer 5 nouvelles méthodes de diagnostic. Et ce qui a été fait également, c'est qu'il y a un suivi qui a été fait au niveau des chauves-souris, et vous voyez un peu à l'image, à partir des GPS, on a pu suivre le mouvement des chauves-souris qui quittent la Guinée et vont vont par la suite se retrouver au Burkina, au Mali et en passant par la Côte d'Ivoire. Donc, ce mécanisme, en tout cas, permet de suivre ces espèces et de pouvoir savoir à telle période où ces espèces se retrouvent, et ça permet aussi de faire, en tout cas, un diagnostic précoce au niveau de ces espèces-là. Également, les résultats de recherche nous a permis d'être un peu situés sur l'épidémiologie de la maladie à virus Ebola. Il y a la chauve-souris qui est identifiée comme un réservoir potentiel de virus, de la maladie à virus Ebola, mais à l'issue de l'analyse des échantillons qui ont été collectés, il est ressorti que la prévalence de la présence du virus chez ces chauves-souris est de l'ordre de 1%, ce qui veut dire que le rôle, en tout cas, comme réservoir de la chauve-souris pour ce qui concerne le virus de la maladie à virus Ebola reste encore à démontrer. Également, pour ce qui concerne les grands singes, sur les échantillons de 4600 qui ont été traités, il a été démontré que ces grands singes-là ne sont pas des réservoirs pour le virus de la maladie à virus Ebola, mais ils sont plutôt, en tout cas, des hôtes intermédiaires pour cette maladie. Au terme de ma présentation, merci pour votre attention et je vous invite à visiter le site du projet qui est juste en bas de l'écran et vous aurez toutes les informations relatives aux activités du projet. Merci.
I'm talking.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those informative presentations. To find out more about the OIE and our work on wildlife, you can check the brand new OIE Wildlife portal. The link is in the chat box on Zoom, so please go there. Okay, so now we're going to have our interactive session. Again, we're just sharing the QR code and the links. We have the, perhaps one of my colleagues can put the link again just in the chat box. You can click directly on the link to Mentimeter to access the quiz, or else you can just take your phone and hold it up to take a screenshot of the QR code, and hopefully that will link directly on your phone. If you use your phone or tablet that's got a touch screen, it means you can answer some of the questions. And you can join alternatively on mentimeter.com, entering this code 83813215. I think we can put the links are all in the chat box, so hopefully we can follow through with this. So if we'll just go to the next slide. Okay, so just to check how many people that we have joining us, if you could pin where you are on the map. So this is so we get an idea of where you are, and hopefully you can see where the other participants are calling from, where they're joining us from. And we had an earlier session where we were more focused on the Asia time zone, and we had lots of participants, not only from Asia and the Pacific, but across the Middle East and Europe and Africa and the Americas. I think now we've definitely moved to the West. I think unlike me, most sensible people in Asia and the Pacific have now gone to bed. We have a few though that are still joining from my side of the world. Big numbers there I see for Central Europe. For 33 there we have in the middle of the graph, the map there. So that's really great to see you all. Let me see how many people have we got joining. So 88. I think maybe there are a few more people that we can expect to join. If you're having difficulties, if you let my colleagues know in the chat box, we can give you some assistance. I think we've got over 200 participants with us, so maybe let's get at least over 100 joining us on Mentimeter. We do have the code at the top of the slides here, so if you drop off the connection for some reason, you can rejoin again and answer the questions. 99, can we get to 100? There we go. Okay, wonderful. So we have 100 of you, and lovely to see you all joining us today. Okay, so we're still growing in numbers, but maybe if we just go to the next slide, you can still participate. But now we want to know a little bit more about you. So what's your area of interest? We know that we've got a lot of different sectors that are interested in wildlife and working with wildlife, but what's your particular area, just so that we've got an idea of what kind of participants we have with us today. So I see we have lots of animal health, wildlife health, One Health, that's great, wildlife medicine, bat health, so specifically talking about one type of animals. We've got economics. All of these are really interesting. It's good to know that we have people that are joining us that are going to be able to help our team to work with wildlife. I saw epidemiology there as well, disease surveillance. We're definitely seeing a lot with wildlife health, One Health, agricultural quarantine. Okay, this is great. So I'll give it just another few seconds. I think maybe everyone hasn't quite got their link in there. So we have 88 responses, maybe just another few. If you could finish up your area and submit, and then we can add you to the group. I see we have veterinary services, vector-borne in wildlife, so vector-borne diseases, deer pathogens. So it's interesting that some of these are really quite specific areas of interest and areas of expertise, and some are much broader. So we do have a lot of different people with us today. So that's great. Okay, so we've reached our hundreds. So let's go to the next slide then, please. Okay, so we're going to do a quick quiz. For these questions, you get points for getting the correct answer, but also fastest. So we'll start with a warm-up question. So let's go to the next slide. So we have everyone joining us. I think you've got the option to put your name in if you want to tell us who you are, and therefore if you win, you'll be top of the leaderboard. So we'll see where we go from that. Okay, let's go to the next slide and start the quiz. Remember, as fast as you can. So which of these are not wild animals? And the options are on your phone if you can select those. So we'll give you half a minute or so to select. I see most of you really quick off the mark here. So bees, crocodiles, frogs, non-human primates, owls, or unicorns. This is great. We've got 112 people playing now. Excellent. Just another few seconds, the last couple of people just to submit their answers. If you're having difficulty joining on Mentimeter, then you can still join for the next questions. Great, 95 of you got unicorns. So we're talking obviously about the kind of wild animals that we're going to be seeing and hopefully helping. So next question. I think now we've got the hang of that. Okay, question 2. So which wildlife species are not covered in the OIE standards? Most of the standards adopted by the OIE are directed towards food-producing animals and some other domesticated species like horses, donkeys, dogs, and ferrets. But we have some that are specific for wildlife species, but which are not covered. So about another 20 seconds. So we've got bees, crocodiles, frogs, non-human primates, water buffaloes, and palm civets. You guys are pretty quick off the mark with your answers. This is good. Let's see how you did. Okay, great. So most of you got the right answer, palm civets. Well done. Interesting that just remember that there are lots of species that we are interested in looking after and providing some guidance on, so do check out the OIE standards. Next question. Okay, question 3. An emerging disease is not. So we're thinking about the OIE definition of an emerging disease. So which one of these is incorrect? So a new agent isolated in a volcano or in the deep sea, a new occurrence of an infection, a new occurrence of a disease, or a new occurrence of an infestation. Give you a little bit longer because it's a longer question. Oh, I see you're all answering quick. Excellent. Another few seconds. 120 of you now. Excellent. So most of you got that right again. So numbers 2, 3, and 4 are actually emerging diseases. Okay, next question, please. Okay, question 4. So Keith mentioned the OIE Wildlife Health Framework earlier, but what is the goal of the framework? So one of these is correct. So monitor wildlife for zoonotic diseases, protect wildlife health to achieve One Health, publish books on wildlife health, report disease in wildlife, restrict wildlife to prevent human contact, or teach veterinarians to treat sick wildlife. So which one of these is the goal of the OIE Wildlife Health Framework? Okay, 10 seconds. I see a few of you are still to respond. Okay, time's up. And I'm very pleased to see that most of you were listening well to the presentations. So great. So the OIE Wildlife Health Framework goal is to protect wildlife health to achieve One Health. Okay, question 5. So this is the last of our quiz questions for now. Let's go. Should we have next question, please? Okay, so which of these is not part of the OIE's mission? We do have a number of parts to our mission. So do they include these? So animal health and welfare management, reporting animal disease situation worldwide, strengthening veterinary services, and building human hospitals. So which one of these is not part of the organization's mission? Okay, almost all of you have answered. Another 20 seconds if you need to make your decision. Okay, I think that might be everyone. So another few seconds. Okay, time's up. I think well spotted there. So obviously it's important to have human hospitals, but because the OIE is really focusing on animal health and animal welfare, then we're not really involved in building human hospitals. We do work very closely with the with our partners in the tripartite, so including WHO, and we are working on One Health issues. I think we've got some more questions on Mentimeter. If we can see the slides again. Okay, oh, here we go. So our leaderboard. So we're looking on who had the most points, the most correct answers, and then also the fastest. So Stingalicious, well done. Go bees. We actually had a unicorn this morning. So that was great. So bees and unicorns today. Okay, next slide. Right, so now we want you to have a little bit of a think and give us some of your opinions. Next question. So we're interested to know, why is wildlife important to you? So following presentations from Dr. Goodall and OIE staff, we're keen to hear what your take is. Why are you interested in wildlife? What excites you about wildlife? What concerns you about wildlife? Or why is wildlife important in your community? I'll maybe just ask some of my colleagues if we've got responses in Spanish or French, if you could help me with those. So we've got reservoir. Go ahead, Eugenia.
The Spanish one, porque son parte del equilibrio de la vida, because they're a part of the equilibrium of life balance.
Okay, and I think there's another Spanish one there.
Yeah, reservorio de enfermedades que pueden afectar a los humanos. Is a reservoir of diseases that could affect humans.
Nope, there's another one on the right.
They're porque son parte fundamental de los ecosistemas de los cuales formamos parte los humanos. Because they're a fundamental part of ecosystems in which humans are part of. Please try to respond in English. Por favor, intenten responder en inglés to collect answers, porque su salud impacta en la salud humana y ambiental como parte del equilibrio, because the health of the animals impacts in human health and environmental as a part of a balance. Interaction among wildlife, productive species, and humans are whole. Involves generation of food for everyone, for every species, therefore of their well-being and subsistence.
Okay, shall we scroll up and I'll go through some of the English responses then?
Yes.
We've got a natural environment. We should respect and help wildlife. They have an intrinsic value. We have lots of responses here, 79 so far, great. Interconnectedness and beauty. I like it. So maybe that's all we need to do. So we have simple is best. One health and planet health. So obviously thinking about the bigger picture. Biodiversity supports healthy communities. So really thinking about wildlife being integrated and part of those communities. Another one about balanced ecosystems, about wildlife enriching our life enormously, protecting their health and public health as well. Talking about human infectious diseases that are related to wildlife, looking at disease transmission between wildlife, domestic animals and humans. So, and this is something that will be touched on a little bit later on, thinking about not only wildlife, but also interactions with domestic animals and people. Shall we scroll down a little bit more? Okay, so wildlife vital for preservation of biodiversity, is a key component in our ecosystem. Okay, I don't think we've got time to read all 90 responses actually, but this is absolutely great. Thank you so much for your suggestions. Should we go to the next question and keep moving? So who will you network with next? We're meeting here today with people from all around the world, as you've seen, and they're all interested in wildlife. So earlier today, we had another session that was connecting young people with the same interest. What will you do in the future to communicate with other people interested in wildlife? So maybe even in this webinar now, you want to put comments in chat box, or perhaps in your university or your workplace, in your own country, or on the other side of the world. Let me know if you've got some new technology that will help you to communicate. That's always interesting to know how people are best communicating around the world. Okay, they're coming in quick and thick and fast now. So looking at the general public, looking at zoos and universities. There's a specific one here, South African Wildlife Management Association. Certainly a lot of countries have different associations that are helping to deal with wildlife. Firstly, colleagues in my country and then the regions. So we can certainly start small and work and look at building bigger. Fellow veterinarians and other colleagues engaging in community and events between public health, animal health and environment, competent authorities. I think that's probably One Health again. And then another one on One Health. If we scroll down a little bit. Jane Goodall, okay, yeah, I think we all were very appreciative of her message for us today, and certainly we're very happy to be able to share that today. With zoo vets across Europe, young influencers, sharing information with local native tribes. So again, thinking about different levels of sharing information. We're looking at ministries and universities, looking at non-governmental organizations, human health and environment sectors. So thinking on different sectors, different expertise that you want to maybe work with other people. I think if we have people interested in economics, that's certainly one to add to the mix as well as we think about how that can be involved. Looking at wildlife and rehabilitation centres, conferences and congresses. Yeah, maybe some of those will even be in person and not everything will be online. Looking again at universities and rehabilitation centres, public administrations, people in communities, vets from wildlife rescue centres, farmers, universities, raising awareness around me. Okay, there's some really good ideas there. Again, I hate to stop before we've read them through them all, but thank you very much. Let us move to the next question. Okay, so actually this is question time for the speakers. If you have any questions for the speakers, you can let us know either using Mentimeter or if you want to put it in chat. I can have a quick check and see if there have been any questions in chat, if my colleagues could let me know if there are any.
No questions so far.
Okay, thanks, Eugenia. We do have, so throughout the webinar, if you want to put your questions in chat or into Mentimeter, if we don't have the speaker with us now or the expert, we will do our best to ask them after the webinar and share their answers. But thank you very much for that. I think that that's really great that we had your inputs and your interaction. We hope it was interesting for you as well to hear those ideas. This has been a great start to the webinar, and now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Patrick Bastiansen, who is Regional Programme Officer based at the OIE Sub-Regional Representation for Eastern Africa. Over to you, Baz. What time is it now in Nairobi?
It's just past 6 o'clock in the evening, so the sun is setting on Nairobi because we live on the equator, so the sun goes down more or less exactly around 6:30. It's a beautiful sight. Thank you. So yes, my name is Bas. I work in Nairobi for the OIE, and it's my honor and privilege to take you through this second session, which is the globe-trotting session, dedicated to some of the more emblematic diseases of wildlife, but also diseases that are lesser known, no doubt, affecting wildlife species, either as a reservoir host, in which case the wildlife is hardly affected, but affects everybody else, maintenance hosts, accidental hosts, or targeted species, in which case there are dangers that the species get seriously affected. So why should we care? I mean, the question has been asked before by Keith. Well, the following presenters, professionals, will highlight the risks to people, to humans, through zoonotic spillover effects, the risks to livestock coming from wildlife and domestic animals in general, and the risk to biodiversity and the risk of extinction of certain wildlife species. So I'll start my tour in the Far East, in the land of the rising sun, where it is now pitch dark, deep in the night. Good for you, Lisa, you're still up. So in Tokyo, where Dr. Hirofumi Kujita, the OIE Regional Representative for Asia and the Pacific, will introduce the subject and the speaker being Dr. Brendan Khalid of Ausvet, a veterinary consulting firm working out of Canberra in Australia. Brendan holds a PhD in applied ecology of wild pigs. So I let you guess which disease he's going to talk about. This presentation will be followed by moving westwards through the time zones, will be followed by a presentation on peste des petits ruminants, or PPR, for which the speaker will be introduced by the OIE Regional Representative for the Middle East, Dr. Ghazi Yahia, based in Beirut in Lebanon. Let me simply add that Professor Ahmad Al-Majali is a full professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine of the Jordan University of Science and Technology, an adjunct professor with Purdue University in Indiana in the US. And then we will conclude the first part of this globetrotting, going even further westwards and listening to a presentation on the fight against rabies in wildlife, prepared by Dr. Maxim Sârbu from the Republic of Moldova and introduced by the OIE Regional Representative for the Europe region, Dr. Budimir Plavsic, who is based in Moscow in Russia. So whoever is in charge of the buttons, please go ahead, and we'll see you later with some more questions on Mentimeter.
I'm talking to you from Tokyo in Japan. The Asian Pacific region includes 32 OIE members with a diverse spectrum of cultures, languages, climate, environment, and of course animals. Much of the region is designated as a biodiversity hotspot with rich aquatic and terrestrial fauna. Unfortunately, we see many threats to this great biodiversity, such as deforestation and other land use changes, and illegal and poorly regulated wildlife trade. Increased human-wildlife interactions, climate change, and antimicrobial resistance have increased emergence of zoonotic diseases and of diseases passing between livestock and wildlife. To tackle these problems, the OIE in the region is focused on two key areas: multi-sectoral collaborations using a One Health approach and networking of wildlife health stakeholders within members, sub-regions, and in the region as a whole. A serious issue affecting the Asia-Pacific region is African swine fever. Since the first report of the virus in the region in August 2018, there has been increasing concern. We have learned from experiences in Europe and are in turn now sharing our knowledge with colleagues in the Americas, where the disease has recently re-emerged. Today's webinar to celebrate World Wildlife Day is a great opportunity for us to share information between regions. In Asian Pacific, much effort on African swine fever has focused on the domestic pig industry. However, the region contains several species of wild pigs, many of which are threatened with extinction. To ascertain the risk of African swine fever to wild pigs, the OIE set up a project in collaboration with experts in the region. I'll now hand over to Dr. Brendan Khalid to discuss details of the project. Thank you.
Hello colleagues, thanks for your attention. My name is Brendan Khalid. I'm a director at OzVet. OzVet's a One Health and veterinary epidemiology company. We've got a presence in Europe and in Southeast Asia and Australia. The reason I'm talking today is I have a background in wild pig management, and we recently did a project for the OIE Regional Office in the Asia and the Pacific on wild pigs and ASF. And I'm going to present some of the results from that project today. So I'd like to start with the general situation about African swine fever throughout the world, about African swine fever, the global situation, and the impact on conservation. So African swine fever is caused by a virus. It's a DNA virus. It's from the Aspergillosis family, and it's very resilient in the environment. It causes African swine fever in pig species. That's especially in domestic and wild sus scrofa, the common pig, but it also has impacts on wild conservation species of wild pig. It's uncertain exactly what impact it has on all species, but it's been shown to cause disease and deaths in several species of wild pigs. But that's not the African wild pigs, because this virus originated in the continent of Africa. It has a stable cycle going on in Africa with wild pigs, so bush pigs, warthogs, etc. It has a cycle with soft ticks, and it causes no disease in those species. But occasionally that leads to spillovers into domestic pigs. That causes disease both in Africa and throughout the world. So there's been a pretty successful period of several decades from the 50s onwards when disease has spilled over into the world of it being contained and eradicated. Maybe not from parts of Italy, but it has been contained and eradicated up till now. But that changed in 2007. There's a major introduction of disease into Georgia, probably from contaminated ship waste, and it spread and established in Georgia and throughout Central Asia. From there it spread to many areas of the world, for example Europe, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and now recently the Americas. This concerns Southeast Asia though, because it spread to China, and from China it spread to the rest of the region. So it's spreading rapidly throughout Southeast Asia now, and that's what this project concentrated on, because it has a significance for conservation. Southeast Asia is really the origin of the pig, and there's many species of endemic wild pig in that area that are found nowhere else in the world, and they're all have some conservation status, either from vulnerable to critically endangered, and African swine fever has a major risk that it will infect these species, kill large proportions of the remaining populations, and lead to further declines in their conservation status. Now to the situation in the Asia and the Pacific region. It's found widely throughout Asia now. It's found in Russian Asia, in China, India, and many countries in between. It's in Southeast Asia in at least half a dozen countries. It's spread even to the Pacific, so it's got to the Papua New Guinea, but no further. It's known to infect and kill 3 species now, domestic and feral pigs and wild boar, sus scrofa, and the bearded pig and the Philippine warty pigs. So it's spread to several species. It's unknown the impact on other species, but it's believed to be important and will cause mortalities. As to the impacts of African swine fever on the wider ecosystem health, there are 2 or 3 real impacts. First is just extinction. A lot of these species are small, not very abundant, and they're under threat already. So a African swine fever outbreak through some of these populations may lead to extinctions, or at least local extirpation of populations. And a good example is the pygmy hog in India. There's only 300 or 400 individuals left in 2 or 3 populations. If a African swine fever outbreak occurred, it could wipe out 1 or more of those populations. Of course, wild pigs, whether they be Suscrofa or other species throughout Southeast Asia, have some really important ecosystem services. For example, they provide a food source and the major food source to many predators such as Sumatran tigers or Javan leopards, for example. They are the major food source. Take away pigs and they'll either prey switch or they won't have the food resources available to recruit into their populations. They're ecosystem engineers. They, for example, affect seedling recruitment and forest regeneration, and they're very important food source and cultural source for people in the area. So wild pigs are used for cultural reasons. So removing wild pigs due to the impact of ASF could have some pretty diverse impacts on the environment and One Health. As to the solutions, there's a few solutions, but first you have to get the context right. Pigs vary throughout their range in how they're used, how they're perceived, and their abundance and ability to control them. So that first thing is context. Prevention, we can actually prevent the further spread through quarantine and border controls and preventing movement between islands throughout the archipelago nations. Detection, here we're really talking about passive surveillance, looking for dead pigs. That's the best way to pick this up. And then we've got response, and the response can be to manage ASF transmission within Suscrofa. Suscrofa are often overabundant, and here we need several steps: interagency cooperation, because it's often jurisdiction between environment or agriculture is confusing. We need better biosecurity at domestic pigs. We need to reduce wild pig densities in some areas, and that's maybe with lethal control to reduce transmission. And we need to minimise movement of products and pigs. And do we need to remove carcasses in cold areas? Yes, because that can maintain ASF virus in the environment. In terms of protecting wild pigs, we need protected populations. We need to prepare for vaccinations if they're ever developed, because this is going to be developed and then have to be used with oral baiting. And then we need to reduce ASF in domestic pigs to reduce spillover. And we need to conduct risk analysis. We need to do quarantine of these endemic species, and we need to do really good biosecurity. So they're the major solutions. I guess the major lesson for sharing would be that the way to control disease in wild pigs varies very much by context and where wild pigs are found. They're across very large areas, and there's a lot of diversity across those areas. So the solutions vary depending on the region and the country and the species. So it's complex. That concludes my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning. In the Middle East, and despite its harsh desert landscape, there is a wide variety of wildlife. Most of the wildlife are hosted in parks, zoos, and secured reserves, especially in GCC country. Middle Eastern deserts are home to a host of animals, including gazelle, sand cats, oryx, and lizard. The parks have also an array of bird species, especially falcons, native to the Arabian Peninsula. Jackals, foxes, and boars are found in Eastern Mediterranean country, like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The region is also home to a diverse range of marine wildlife. Harmless sea creatures are often found in warm, shallow waters, making the Arabian Gulf a very suitable habitat. In most of the Middle Eastern countries, wildlife health is entrusted to the Veterinary Services Authority. Nevertheless, intersectoral collaboration is conducted with other authorities such as the Ministry of Environment, as well as the private sector is on many occasions giving support and assistance. Countries in the region have already developed regulatory frameworks to enable the veterinary service to carry on disease epidemiological surveillance and other procedures at the human-animal ecosystem interface, which are mostly integrated with the domestic animal diseases surveillance system, targeting, for instance, rabies and S. diphtheria, our today's regional topic. Talking about PPR, as you are aware, it is an endemic disease in the Middle East, and countries of the region have already embarked in the PMAT mechanism for the eradication of the disease. Nevertheless, a regionally concerted effort to support both both national and regional actions is required to control the disease, especially in wildlife. And the animal health services entrusted with this task require support and strengthening. At the end, there is a need to increase multi-sectoral coordination, especially within the One Health approach, as promoted by international organizations, and better involvement of local community living near wildlife habitats. The OIE Wildlife Health Framework presents a good guidance for protecting wildlife health within the One Health concept. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce to you Professor Ahmed Al-Majali, very well known by the majority of veterinary services in the region. He is the former dean and actual professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Just, Jordan. And Professor Al-Majali has his fingerprints in many projects to the surveillance and control of transboundary animal diseases in the region. Professor Al-Majali, you have the floor.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Ahmed Al-Majali. I am from Jordan, and I am a professor of infectious diseases and epidemiology with Jordan University of Science and Technology, and currently working for the FAO SNG as consultant. Today, I'll be talking to you about a very important disease that affects domesticated and wild ruminant, which is PPR. It is a well-known fact that wildlife health and diseases are increasingly important aspect of wildlife conservation, especially for those that are at risk for extinction. It is interesting to know that about 72% of zoonotic diseases are originated in wild animals. What we really need is to do more surveillance to understand wildlife populations and to do more effective investigations regarding wildlife disease outbreaks, and to critically look for effective management for those diseases in order to save livestock, environment, wildlife, as well as human populations under the umbrella of One Health approach. Wildlife scientists are poorly equipped, and there is not much fund going to wildlife investigations. Let's come back to PPR. PPR is a major transboundary animal disease that is very important from socio-economic point of view. It is caused by a virus, Morbilli virus, which is an RNA virus, and it affects wild as well as domesticated ruminants. Most of the isolates that were reported during the last 10 years from wildlife ruminants belong to the lineage of the PPR. It is worth mentioning that there are 4 lineages of PPR. All wild ruminants are susceptible to PPR. The clinical and pathological findings are similar to those seen in domesticated goats, such as mucopurulent nasal discharges, pneumonia clinical signs, ulcerative keratitis along with conjunctivitis. Young animals might be found dead, high mortalities in young animals. From pathological point of view, you're going to see pinpoint grayish areas of necrosis in the buccal cavity. The gastrointestinal tract will be hemorrhagic, congested, especially in the abomasum, and you will see erosions and congestions forming lines, or what we call stripings, or the zebra stripings. The lungs might be affected, as I said, and if they are, you will see consolidated lungs. The picture here shows some of the clinical signs, which is the mucopurulent nasal discharges as well as the keratoconjunctivitis. The pictures below show the inclusion bodies in microscopic picture or microscopic sections of the intestine. In this slide, we see more clinical and pathological findings associated with PPR virus, the mucopurulent nasal discharge, the erosions in the buccal cavity, and on the right we see the zebra strines in the picture, in the pictures below, as well as the consolidated lungs and some of the lesions that you see in the mouth. When it comes to spreading, PPR mainly spread by close contact between infected animals. The virus is shed in all secretions almost and excretions of infected animals. Aerosol transmission of PPR is also possible. Animals are considered infectious during the incubation period, which lasts from 2 days to 10 days. It is important to remember that carriers are not developed due to PPR infection. In this slide again, we see the distribution of PPR. We see that mostly Africa and Asia are endemic with PPR. All the Middle East region are endemic with PPR, and they are participating in the PPR global control eradication strategy, which rank them from 1 to 4. And we see that all countries are either in 1 or 2 levels of the PCP PPR basically ranking. In this slide, we see the distribution of PPR in wildlife, and we see that during the period between 2005 to 2019, only 34 countries reported PPR virus in it, only few from the Middle East region. Those that reported basically PPR in wildlife, they reported either virus detection by genetic methodology or mostly by serology. And this exactly reflects the fact that the interface between livestock and wild ruminants is very important when it comes to the epidemiology of PPR in wildlife. And we see that most of the countries that reported PPR in wildlife, they have reported PPR in domesticated animals. In the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, Iran, and the occupied Palestinian territory, as well as Saudi Arabia, are the ones that literatures or data of OIE shows that they have reported PPR in wildlife. And mostly those were in antelopes or in reem gazelles, Arabian mountain gazelles, springbuck, Nubian ibex, Barbary sheep, or the fallow deer in Iran, mountain gazelle, Nubian ibex, and wild boars, as well as fallow deer in the occupied territories in Saudi Arabia. The species is not available. However, the area that was affected during 2009, they have reported a few cases in Tabuk area, and it was basically in wildlife, but they did not show what type of wildlife. As of the effect of wildlife PPR on the basically ecosystem health and biodiversity, it is very well known that PPR outbreaks resulting in severe mortalities and eventually threaten the wildlife population and ecosystem stability. And basically all the research, or most of the research done, suggests that the spillover at the wildlife livestock interface is very important in the epidemiology, but we needed more work in order to elucidate other factors. And the expansion of PPR into free-ranging wildlife negatively impacted biodiversity and reduces the vision of PPR-free world, which was announced by the OIE and FAO, which expected to happen in year 2030. And the current surveillance for wildlife diseases usually targets diseases that affect humans only, or that have zoonotic importance, but basically less information or less funds going towards studying other diseases that affect livestock population per se, such as PPR. In order to eradicate PPR in wildlife, we need to incorporate the wildlife basically in the global strategy that is meant for controlling PPR, which consists of 4 components. We need to do modifications on those components by engaging wildlife and veterinary agencies in the PPR eradication at the wildlife livestock interface. And we need to support wildlife diagnostics by finding all diagnostic tools in the wildlife and wildlife scientists. We need to integrate PPR virus control efforts and targeting more vaccination for livestock, basically, which will help in preventing spillovers to the wildlife. And we need to find new methods for basically vaccinating wildlife if possible. And finally, we need to coordinate and manage between the different agencies, different countries, to incorporate wildlife in their control strategies for PPR. Thank you very much for listening.
Dear colleagues, dear students, it is my great pleasure to welcome you on this important webinar on behalf of the OIE teams from Europe. We think that this unique webinar on global wildlife health will bring an excellent opportunity to share the knowledge and to share best practices, how to reduce and how to manage the risk of transmission of the zoonotic viruses and other pathogens at human-animal ecosystem interface, and also to see how is the better way to develop the system for early detection, notification, and management of animal disease to cover also wildlife diseases. As we know, wild animals are essential to maintain ecosystem and health of all living organisms, but they are under serious pressure of climate change, global warming, destruction of their natural habitats with lack of clean water and air, all caused mainly by humans. And that is why veterinary profession must contribute to the protection of wild animals and their health by development of strong and efficient animal disease control system based on OIE standards. We trust this is achievable, and we have examples of effective control of zoonotic animal disease in wild animals. Rabies is one of them, and in Europe we have excellent examples of rabies virus elimination in more than half of our member countries who implement oral rabies vaccination with strong general, also called passive surveillance system. In other countries in our region, veterinary services in partnership with other authorities implement activities related to the dog-mediated rabies elimination before 2030. Now it is my great pleasure to announce and to invite a colleague of mine, Dr. Maxim Sirbu, from National Veterinary and Food Safety Authority in the Republic of Moldova, who is also a focal point for disease notification and also national coordinator responsible for implementation of program of oral rabies vaccination of wild carnivores in Moldova. Maxim, let's learn from your experience. The floor is yours.
Zoonosis of virotic origin that has the highest lethality rate in both animals and humans infected with the rabies virus. Notification of the incidence of disease annually come from the more than 150 countries around the world, and the number of deaths due to rabies is over 50,000 people annually. At the same time, the number of people vaccinated due to bites caused by sick or suspected animals infected with rabies virus exceeds 15 million of persons every year. The rabies virus particularly affects of central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord. It occurs rarely in vaccinated pet, but can be easily contracted with an unvaccinated pet comes in contact with other sick or wild animal and is bitten or scratched by it. Humans can be contaminated by bites produced from both contaminated domestic and wild animals. The main reservoir of rabies virus in the wildlife in the Europe region being mainly represented by the red fox. Contaminated foxes, depending on the stage of disease, change their behavior. The lack of fur, which is characteristic of wild animals, is one of the most common behavioral changes that can be noted consequently. Foxes enter in localities and in animals' shelters during the day at allow humans to approach them. Moreover, without becoming aggressive, they bite animals and humans and have a fixed gaze, sometimes with insecure gait followed by paralysis and death. Another important sources of the disease, as well as a potential reservoir of virus, represent the stray dogs in urban areas that bite humans and various species of animals. However, the measures taken to reduce their number and expose them to prophylactic vaccination are involving slow and require additional financing sources. Given the important social and economic impact of rabies, the disease is constantly monitored by the veterinary service and it's being included in the plan of the strategic veterinary measures in the country, which provides concrete measures regarding surveillance, prevention and control of the disease in susceptible animals and assure the population protection from contamination. Situation of rabies on example of Republic of Moldova. Republic of Moldova is one of the countries in the Europe countries region which has a comparatively high number of rabies cases. From 1952 of present, rabies remains an endemic zoonosis in the territory of Republic of Moldova, with a different incidence disease having higher frequency in wild animals, mainly represented by the red fox. The data gathered from the laboratory results obtained in the period 2010 or 2020 was used to analyze the role of wildlife, especially red foxes, in maintaining and spreading cases of rabies in domestic animals. The highest peak of rabies cases in foxes was recorded in the years 2010, 2012, 2014, 2015. To speak about the geographical spread of rabies in the territory of Republic of Moldova, the quantity of red foxes in the territory of Republic of Moldova is over than 7 times from the norm. Analyzing the geographical spread of rabies on the territory of Republic of Moldova, it can be seen that outbreaks of rabies were widespread in all geographical areas of the Republic. However, an increased concentration of cases can be seen in the northern and central part of the Republic, where the surface of forest strips is higher. At the same time, at the anti-rabies offices of the Republic, on average, less than 2,000 people that had contact with suspected or suffering from rabies animals were bitten by stray dogs, cats, wild animals, or rodents, or were vaccinated. If speaking about the rabies cases in humans, we had in 2003, 2016, and 2019 rabies cases in humans. Speaking about the solution, first of all, I want to speak about vaccination and information of population. And of course, we need to speak about the program what was launched in 2020 in Republic of Moldova. It's a bilateral program with Romania, which aimed to vaccinate wildlife animals against rabies by the combined method, manual, and by the plain vaccination of foxes. The main aspects of rabies prophylaxis are focused on applying general prophylaxis measures and providing prophylactic vaccination of receptive animals, actions that allow the category of dogs and cats in rural localities, identification of rabies cases, permanent control of health status of domestic and wild animals, and of course vaccination, application of different kinds of vaccinations. What we could to speak about the lessons. First of all, it's a vaccination and information of the population. If to speaking about the Europe region, we could see that the rabies evolution is dredging evolution. The most frequent cases of disease in the Europe region were registered in red foxes. And if talking about the results of the programs of vaccination of wild animals, it's very high reduction of rabies cases in animals after the first 2-3 years of vaccination with combination of manual and plain distribution of vaccine. Thank you for your attention.
Baz, you're on mute.
So I was saying these were the 3 out of 5 first diseases that were presented to you: African swine fever, PPR, and rabies. All very important from a wildlife perspective. Some from a zoonotic point of view, others more from a threat to livestock or a threat to wildlife themselves. We will be taking a short break just now, 10-minute break. But before that, I would like to refer you back to the Mentimeter session and let you use those 10 precious moments, those 10 precious minutes to answer this question. How would you support ecosystem restoration? This is the theme of World Wildlife Day 2022. So just give it a thought. How would you support ecosystem restoration? So we'll be back in 10 minutes. We will discuss some of your suggestions. We will also address some of the remaining questions in the chat box, and then we'll go for the remainder of the diseases of wildlife that we want to discuss today. 10 minutes, so we'll see you back at 5 to the hour.
Wildlife makes an essential contribution to our life support system.
For example, for local communities who live at the interface with wildlife, this is a main source of proteins.
Without bees, we wouldn't have fruit.
Bats are actually pollinators. They are seed dispersers, and if tomorrow bats are gone, that will affect human health and their domestic animal health. An emerging disease emerging from wildlife, which is called the Nipah Virus. It appeared in Asia a few years ago. There was a lot of deforestation to plant palm trees. The thousands of bats had to go elsewhere to feed themselves. So they get closer to human settlements, and particularly closer to pig farms, where there were mango trees and where they could feed. They were carrier of this Nipah virus that eventually were transmitted to the pigs who got sick, and then the pigs contaminated the humans.
The virus that causes COVID-19 almost certainly came from wildlife.
And to reduce the risk of emerging disease and prevent the next pandemic, we need to better understand their origin and drivers. Human activities are the main factors increasing the emergence of disease from wildlife.
Deforestation is one of them, and also the exploitation of natural resources in forests where human beings are not used to go.
Because we have more contact between wildlife, domestic animals, and humans.
One factor that's thought to be related to the emergence of disease from wildlife is the unregulated trade in wildlife. And we still don't understand wildlife supply chains in many parts of the world. So a lot of work needs to be done to understand where those risks are.
Because we share the ecosystem with wildlife and domestic animals, our health is intrinsically linked to the health of animals and the environment.
Animals and humans, they live within the ecosystem. So it's important that the environment is put at the center of the discussion.
People need to be aware of the value of wildlife as assets and the important role that they play in maintaining health of individuals, health of society.
To improve wildlife health is to improve the health of all, environment, animals, and humans.
The OIE has been developing a wildlife health framework to better integrate wildlife health in its core activities.
And it really builds on OIE's existing platforms, tools, mechanisms.
Our members can report incidents on the wildlife disease outbreaks directly on our platform. This information is shared with the international communities, so earlier action can be taken.
This framework aims to protect wildlife health to better achieve One Health. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the first pandemic that humanity is facing, and is not going to be the last one.
If we do nothing for wildlife health and for biodiversity, we will have more and more pandemic events like the one we have with the COVID-19.
We need to act now because we have everyone's attention, and people are starting to understand the importance of wildlife health in preventing disease emergence at the human-animal interface.
Let's give it a few more minutes for people to come back, and then we'll proceed. Yes, I was just going to suggest that we start sharing the results of the Mentimeter poll. So the question was, given the theme for today's, or this year's theme for World Wildlife Day, what would you consider important to support ecosystem restoration, thereby assuming that ecosystems are degraded, and what can you do to stop it or revert to a previous state of healthy ecosystems. So there are some interesting points coming through here. Limit mass tourism, respect intact ecosystem, replant trees, obviously. It's important to inform governments about the importance of biodiversity. There's lack of interest by governments. Development of policies on One Health in collaboration with all relevant sectors or stakeholders, rather. I think we'll see that coming back. Putting a stop to hunting, I read there. Reduce littering, waste. Working with the local communities to make a good science-based diagnosis. What are the key elements for restoration? And obtain social and political support. So this brings us back to how important governments think ecosystem restoration is. Teach local communities on how to use wildlife in a resilient way. Save injured wildlife or translocate it into safe areas. Okay, that's an interesting one. It basically boils down to reintroduction of species that have disappeared or are disappearing. I see one appearing in Spanish. Eugenia, can you help me out on this one? Proporcionar los elementos.
Of course. To give the natural elements that were, to give back the natural elements that were damaged, as like replanting flora, free water sources that been obstaculized. I cannot read. It's like to give back the natural elements to the ecosystems. It means it's like give back, replanting trees and plants, like to say water fountains, water things to being obstaculized. I don't know how to say it.
I think that some infrastructures may block access of ecosystems or animals within those ecosystems to, for instance, water resources, and that these things, like dams, for instance, I would imagine that dams block access of animals to drinking water, and that these things should be taken into consideration. Can we scroll down a bit further? Or is that the bottom of it? Okay, I see that we can't scroll further apparently. Although I suspect that I saw more text down there.
Sorry, it's not letting me scroll down. I'm gonna stop sharing and try again.
Maybe we should just proceed, Eugenia, with the program.
Okay.
In the interest of time, I just wanted to mention that we have attempted through our experts and colleagues to answer as much of the questions that were put in the chat box. However, there are two questions regarding, first of all, the status of rabies in the surrounding countries of Moldova that we cannot answer because Dr. Sârbu is not in the room this evening. But if the person that asked this question could kindly put his or her email in the chat box, we will forward that question to Dr. Sârbu for him to answer directly to you. The other one is the question about the wild boars in Asia there as well. Dr. Khalid is not in the room at present, so if you could kindly send your email repeating that question, then we will make sure he gets it and can get back to you on that one. Please continue asking questions. You can use the Mentimeter Q&A to post your questions. You can post your questions in the chat box. With this, I will proceed to the last 2 stops in our globetrotting exercise, meaning that we are now moving westwards and especially southwards to my own country and city, Nairobi, where we will be learning about anthrax, what anthrax does to people, what anthrax does to livestock, and what anthrax does to wildlife. The subject will be introduced by Dr. Augusta Kivunzia. She's a Kenyan veterinarian who has been part of numerous joint investigation teams investigating outbreaks of anthrax in villages across Kenya. This is unfortunately a rather common event throughout East Africa. Augusta and the subject of anthrax in turn will be introduced by the OIE Regional Representative for Africa, who is based in Bamako in Mali, Dr. Karim Tunkara. And then we'll finish our globetrotting going even further westwards to Central America, where from the OIE representation in Panama City, Dr. Katia Martinez Rivas will introduce the last disease and the last speaker, which are in that order: Whitenose Syndrome in bats, and Dr. Jordi Seegers from the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative in Halifax. Jordi is the National Whitenose Syndrome and Bat Health Program Coordinator, and in this capacity, he works with a multidisciplinary interagency network of wildlife health experts, researchers, decision makers, and the industry. So whoever is organizing this, please run the 2 last presentations, please.
Africa is a continent endowed with a high diversity of wildlife, many of which are emblematic large land mammals, encompassing carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, but also marine life and others, existing under different types of ecosystems according to individual species adaptation and the availability of foods. The ecosystem covers savanna, grasslands, plains, and forests, desert and semi-desert, mountain environment, coastal environment, etc. Every ecosystem is shaped by prevailing climatic and environmental factors. Encroachment of natural habitats through human activity and global warming present the 2 most important threats to these ecosystems and, by extension, the diverse wildlife population of Africa. Although considered natural regulators of wildlife numbers, diseases also present a formidable threat to wildlife. A case in point is anthrax, which annually decimates populations of terrestrial herbivores in Africa, such as buffalo, impala, elephants, hippos, and others. The choice of the term anthrax is therefore not fortuitous. Indeed, anthrax, an acute bacterial disease primarily of herbivorous animals, livestock, but also wildlife, is transmissible to humans and is often lethal. The transmission occurs in a contaminated environment, making the disease a textbook example of a disease requiring a One Health approach to control it. Without any further ado, I invite Augusta Kivunzia to make her presentation. Dr. Kivunzia is a veterinarian working for veterinary services of Kitui County in Kenya, in East Africa. She has taken part in many so-called joint investigation teams, investigating cases of anthrax, usually detected when villagers end up in hospital after consuming animals that likely died from anthrax. Her experience in dealing with such complex disease epidemiology is the result of her time working for the Zoonotic Disease Unit of the Joint Ministries of Health and Agriculture in Kenya between 2016 and 2019. Dear Augusta, karibu sana. The floor is yours. Thank you.
My name is Augusta Kivunzia. This is surveillance officer working for Kitui County Government, Kenya, and Africa. I'm presenting to you anthrax in wildlife in Africa. Anthrax is a soil-borne disease caused by spore-forming bacteria, that is Bacillus cereus bipolar anthracis and Bacillus anthracis, causing periodic and localized outbreaks in wildlife and domestic livestock, sometimes with spillover to people, leading most often to cutaneous anthrax and sometimes to pulmonary and gastrointestinal form of anthrax. Most of the wildlife in Africa lives in the savanna ecosystem. In this area, animals interact with wildlife and they pose a risk of transmission of diseases among the livestock and wildlife animals. And therefore, spillover to people result from butchering and consumption of wild and domestic animals that have died or are deceased from anthrax. Unfortunately, anthrax is not easily detected in wildlife, and therefore people and livestock often serve as sentinels for disease surveillance in wildlife. Anthrax is one of the oldest diseases in animals in Africa, quoted in the Bible in Egypt in 1491 for Christ. Genotyping studies suggest that anthrax origin to be sub-Saharan Africa with spread to the rest of the world. Earliest records of anthrax in wildlife in Africa are dated back to over 150 years ago, affecting herbivores, and outbreaks mostly occurring during the dry season. Anthrax is recorded to be occurring in more than 12 countries in Africa, most cases being reported in southern part of Africa, then the eastern part of Africa, some parts of West Africa and Central Africa. However, this is likely underreported. Anthrax recur in areas where it had happened before. For example, in Uganda, Queen Elizabeth, 1959 and 1960, there was an outbreak, which recurred in 1961, again in 2004, 2005, and 2010. In Zambia, anthrax occurred in wildlife in 1987 and again in 1989. In Kenya, anthrax occurred in Lake Nakuru National Park in 2015 and again in 2017, the same area. In Namibia, 1998 and 1989, there were outbreaks which occurred in the same place, that is Etosha National Park. Anthrax has been affecting different species in the wildlife, but most of the animals which are being hit most are the herbivores, especially the hippos, buffaloes, elephants, zebras, the kudus, among others. Most of these species, herbivores, have been recorded in South Africa, where 68% of the deaths were because of kudus. And this was in the southern part of Africa. In the eastern part of Africa, 90% of herbivores have been said to be the animals which have died from anthrax. In Kenya, from studies done to review outbreaks in wildlife for the last 18 years. In West Africa and Central Africa, anthrax has been affecting chimpanzees, wild chimpanzees, and gorillas. Anthrax outbreaks in wildlife threaten extinction of endangered species, especially for example, great apes in West Africa. They also reduce the number of wildlife, and this makes them more vulnerable and they become also threatened to extinction with time. It also disrupts food chain in the wildlife, and this may lead to wildlife-human conflict, especially when wildlife encroach human settlements. When carcasses are opened, either by human or by vultures, they contaminate the environment, the water bodies, the vegetation, as well as the soil. And this becomes the hotspots for future outbreaks in that area. When this anthrax spills over to human, it may cause deaths to human, as well as increase the cost due to treatment. Some of the diseases which harbor in the wildlife, when these wildlife die, these diseases may start affecting other livestock and human, causing emerging and re-emerging diseases. It is expensive to control outbreaks in the wildlife and also in the livestock. And therefore, this leads to huge economic losses, fear of tourists visiting such national parks, and also threatens livelihood for people who depend on wildlife for survival. Surveillance, reporting systems, and outbreak response are very important in control of anthrax. This will help in detecting the disease early in advance before it spills over to the human and livestock. Coordination and collaboration in the local, national, and the regional will help in control of the disease in a holistic way, because it is a disease which affects the environment, the wildlife, and the livestock. Education campaigns will increase the awareness of anthrax. Anthrax vaccines are important in vaccination of susceptible livestock, as well as endangered species, and prevent them from being extinct due to this disease. Research helps to determine the ecological risk factors, as well as come up with hotspot maps and risk maps, maps of occurrences. And these areas will help in determining and surveillance of anthrax to ensure that the anthrax is detected early enough before it spills over. This data from research can also be used to come up with the policies which will help better management of wildlife and prevention of wildlife from diseases. Advocacy for resource mobilization, especially from the political class, to ensure that enough funding is allocated to wildlife and disease control. Africa Anthrax Network are important because it helps to come up with a unified way of controlling anthrax in the region. Diagnostics and laboratory capacity to isolate and characterize the disease-causing agents and be able to know which pathogen is causing which disease where. Some of the shared lessons are that One Health approach to surveillance gives better data and improved response. Early warning systems using real data reporting will help to prevent spillover of the disease to people. Regional coordinated anthrax network should be considered in order to bridge the gap and address and reporting. Control of anthrax involves breaking the anthrax cycle of infection through vaccination of livestock, endangered species, destruction of carcasses, and decontamination of the environment. Anthrax outbreaks range from sporadic to high mortality episodics, with no consistency in space and time, especially in the naive population. And anthrax drivers are complex, ranging from climate, soil conditions, animal community structure, socio-cultural behavior, tradition, poverty, and food security, as well as animal movements. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Katia Martinez, OIE Regional Representative for Central America. Wildlife health deserves attention and investment. People and animals share the same ecosystem, which is why public health, animal health, and ecosystem health are closely linked. An example of this are bats, animals that also they are often considered carriers of deadly viruses, are the fundamental species for ecosystems around the world for their work as seed dispersers, pollinators, or insect population controllers. Declines in bat populations as a result of deadly pathogens or other factors could have a major ecological, socioeconomic, and health impact across the globe. In this regards, I am pleased to welcome our next speakers, Dr. Jordi Seegers, coordinator of Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative National Program on Whitenose Syndromes and Bats Health. Dr. Seegers will share with us a presentation on Whitenose Syndromes in bats, a fungal disease that affects entire colonies, reducing their populations and affecting the ecosystem role of bats. We hope that the experience shared in this presentation and in this global seminar will help you learn more about current wildlife issues and how different countries are addressing this. At the same time, we hope that you will be able to connect and exchange knowledge with colleagues from other regions to continue to deepen this important topic for the OIE and our members. Dr. Seegers, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Jordi Seegers. I am with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and I'm the National Bat Health Scientific Program Coordinator. Bats are incredibly important to ecosystems around the world, where they provide ecosystem services such as insect control, pollination, and seed dispersal. And most of all the 1,400 plus bat species around the world are insectivores, as are nearly all of the 49 bat species living in Canada and the United States. And by controlling insect populations, bats not only provide a service to the ecosystem, but they directly contribute to our economical and personal health as well. Bats provide billions of dollars worth in pest control to the agricultural industries by consuming large amounts of insects that damage crops such as corn, potato, and cotton. Insectivorous bats in temperate climates of Canada and the United States either migrate south or hibernate more locally to survive winter when insect food is not available. Whitenose syndrome is a fungal disease of hibernating bats in North America. The fungus responsible for causing this disease is called Pseudogymnoascus destructans. This fungus was likely accidentally introduced from Europe by people. And while European bats seem to have an evolutionary advantage, that of natural immunity to the effects of the fungus, unfortunately, many North American bats do not have this immunity. The fungus attacks the skin tissue of these bats while they're hibernating and while their immune systems are suppressed. And in particular, it damages the wings, which in turn causes bats to dehydrate more rapidly, which requires them to arouse from hibernation and burn valuable fat reserves in order to find water. So due to this increased activity in winter, many bats perish by running out of their limited energy reserves. Whitenose syndrome was first discovered in New York State in 2006, and through targeted wildlife health surveillance, it was observed spreading about 200 to 250 kilometers every year. And this is primarily facilitated by bats because of their nature of flying to different hibernation sites during their fall mating season. So the first winter, often only the white fluffy fungus is observed growing on bats' ears, wings, and nose, hence its given name, Whitenose syndrome. But in subsequent years, hibernating bat populations numbers usually plummet. So typically we're seeing 90% declines of bat populations over only 2 or 3 years, and sometimes even more than that. In 2011, about 5 years after Whitenose syndrome was first discovered, it was estimated that anywhere from 5.7 to 6.7 million bats had died from this disease. But more recent estimates, updated estimates, are still pending. And while Whitenose syndrome began as a disease among hibernating bats in the east of the continent, it has now spread to 37 US states and 7 Canadian provinces, and is affecting at least 12 different bat species in eastern and central Canada and the United States, as well as now also southern and even western United States. This rapid geographic spread and the severe populations declines caused by Whitenose syndrome among several species have resulted in multiple bat species being federally or regionally listed on Species at Risk Acts. In both Canada and the US, several bat species are either listed as endangered, threatened, or they're currently undergoing species status assessment. So there is a real risk of extirpation or even extinction of these species, but what would this really mean for our ecosystems? Well, we know that North American bats consume a lot of insects, roughly half their body weight per night, and we know that we have lost a lot of bats due to Whitenose syndrome. So cascading effects on insect communities and beyond are inevitable. So with ecosystems being as interconnected as they are, it's actually really hard to understand these cascading effects. However, it can be expected that other insectivorous animals, like some fish, insects, and bird species, may actually increase in populations to fill the niche left by the declining bat populations. And in turn, this changes the abundance and composition of those species predators, and the cascading effect of all of that can have significant effects on the ecosystem as a whole. In the agricultural sector, some preliminary data suggest that there's an increase in the use of insecticides in areas after the arrival of Whitenose syndrome. And the increased use of such toxic substances can negatively impact both our natural world and our human health. And while bats do eat mosquitoes, studies have shown that the impact on mosquito populations is highly variable among different regions, and that typically such insects as mosquitoes are eaten more opportunistically by bats. However, the loss of millions of bats would certainly have the potential to decrease the control of mosquito populations. And mosquitoes are significant disease factors, so that would impact our human health as well. But really more research on ecosystem-wide effects are needed to allow us to better understand and predict how the loss of bats is really changing our world. So the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative coordinates Canada's National Whitenose Syndrome and Bat Health Program, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service coordinates the US Whitenose Syndrome Program. And such national coordination programs with strong international collaboration help to bring available resources together and provide situational awareness among stakeholders, including wildlife managers with a mandate for wildlife health. So we build partnership, we share knowledge, we put resources in place so that bat health monitoring and assessment can be done. And I'm talking about bat health here because, well, Whitenose syndrome mitigation alone is not enough. There's really only so much that we can do. Through decontamination protocols and procedures, we are limiting the spread of this fungal disease caused by people, but we can't really halt the spread, this now natural spread that's occurring by bats. So really, to curb potential extinction of these bats, a holistic approach in bat health management is essential. So we collaborate with partners to identify, protect, and enhance critical habitat, and we facilitate efforts to develop best management practices for industry partners such as wind energy, pest control operators, forestry, and mining industry, and so on, so that remnant bat populations are managed with population health in mind. So this is really where we can make a difference for bat health, not so much in saving them directly from the disease Whitenose syndrome, but those bats that seem to somehow survive naturally, protect them by designating critical habitat and protecting other habitats that these bats need to hibernate, to forage, to drink, and to roost in and to raise their babies, and therefore reproduce. So early detection of wildlife health issues is imperative to allow wildlife managers to initiate an early response. Whitenose syndrome kind of caught us all by surprise, but we did learn valuable lessons about the ongoing risk of pathogen transmission between continents and species, and the importance of decontamination protocols, as I mentioned before, and other best management guidance, as well as the importance of mitigating threats other than diseases, because wildlife health is not simply the absence of disease. Health goes much deeper than that. It considers the interaction of biological, social, and environmental factors that may impact at-risk populations, because wildlife health is influenced by the cumulative effects of multiple stressors or threats. So there are many parts to managing endangered species that are facing not only devastating diseases, but whose populations are under pressure from many other factors impacting their health. And we can't forget about those factors, and we need to address those impacts. So having nationally coordinated response programs in place is key to making sure everybody working towards the same goals, the goals of preventing species extinction and ensuring recovery of impacted species, that we can research and manage wildlife as effectively and efficiently as possible, of course, before species go extinct, so that we can help these species thrive and help us maintain important ecosystem balances. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any further questions or you'd like to chat about Whitenose Syndrome or bat health, I'd be happy to chat with you. So contact me at this email address. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
So hello, everyone.
Thank you so much. So this concludes our tour of the world with 5 hopefully interesting diseases of wildlife with various interfaces, various importance for people and livestock. We will revisit these 5 diseases briefly now with the help of Eugenia, who will take us to the last session. And but before that, a few Mentimeter questions to refresh your mind. So Eugenia, you're based in Buenos Aires. You were up very early this morning in the middle of the night. And what time is it now in Buenos Aires?
Now it's 1:26 p.m. in Buenos Aires. What time is it over there in Nairobi?
Nairobi is now 7:30 in the evening. So you can see that here is a bit dark. That's because there's no sunshine anymore.
It's almost 1:30 in the morning here.
The hero for this session. Okay, are you ready for the Mentimeter questions on the presentations we should see?
So let's all move to Mentimeter again.
Yes. Okay. So for this session, we will go through questions that the answer relies within the presentations we should see. Remember, extra points for answer fast. Question 6 out of 10. Wait, sorry. Yes. My computer is not collaborating, sorry. Can African swine fever kill Philippine warty pigs? Yes or no answer. You have a binomial variable here. Take a chance. Hopefully with knowledge that you gain in the presentation of African swine fever before. Time's up. Yes. Okay. 4 people have been distracted, but it's a good one. So the next one, question 7 out of 10. Ready? Should be. Oh, it's not responsive. Okay. Is the petit ruminant spread by vectors? Still with binomial. Is it spread by vectors? It's a vectorial disease also. Yes or no? 3 seconds to go. Now it's your time to shine. Time's up. No in 36 cases have answered correctly. Okay, I'm sorry going through this fast. Question 8 out of 10. Remember to click fast. In Europe, are red foxes the main rabies reservoir? Look at your phone. You have still 10 seconds to respond. Are red foxes the main rabies reservoir? 3, 2, 1, time's up. Yes. Great. We're doing good with the answers. Thank you for your patience. Question 9. Is anthrax a telluric disease? The definition of telluric disease was within the presentation. I'm sure most of you know it. Is it or is it not anthrax a telluric disease? Time's up. Yes. Oh, well, let me confirm that anthrax is a telluric disease. It lives in the soil. Next question. We're going. Do pest controllers in agriculture fight bats or are they allies? Do pest controllers in agriculture fight bats? Yes or no answers. 7 seconds to go. Do they work together or do they fight against each other? Time's up. Okay, this was close. What are their allies? Both control insect populations. So the answers, who won this session? MDR. Oh, MDR, thank you very much for your fast typing. Okay, and now it's time to gather your opinions. So for this one, you should name a key issue related to wildlife health worldwide. Sorry. Okay, name a key issue related to wildlife health worldwide. It's a free question, free answer. So I'm gonna start reading them out loud. Extinction, deforestation, zoonosis, preservation, funding, unregulated wildlife trade, zoonosis again, migration, legal trade, yes, legal, hope. Let's not forget that legal trade of wildlife species is the livelihood of many communities around the globe. Lack of funding, unfortunately, coordination, the disease diagnosis, One Health, biodiversity, poaching, One Health, wildlife-human interaction, commitment, tourists, surveillance, interconnection, deforestation, habitat destruction. I think we get the idea. I like the variability of the answers. Spread deadly diseases, biodiversity loss priorities, consideration, human encroachment, habitat, wildlife trade, antimicrobial resistance, destruction of the ecosystems, knowledge for human health. I think we can go, if you agree, to the next question for the sake of time. What is the next step for a healthy, biodiverse world? We're having a presentation regarding this one, but we're interested also in seeing your opinions. So start. I am here. Education, sorry, it's not responsive. Education, conservation. What is the next step for a healthy, biodiverse world? Do not forget the title of the webinar. Transformative change, healthy humans, respect the wild habitat and don't exploit it. Do not invade habitats of the fauna. Awareness boost. One Health approach, afforestation, to connect the knowledge of policies and regulation, knowledge, respect of the ecosystem, and stop irresponsible urbanization, finding people with common sense willing to not be selfish, development of policies that can be harmonized in all relevant sectors. It's actually what we do, the OIE. Healthy wildlife and human cohabitation, one welfare framework, multidisciplinary approach, respect for wildlife biodiversity, stakeholders integration, respect, education, preservation of habitat, change, higher acknowledgement of the value of wilderness, cultivation of respect for biodiversity, yes, engaging future generation is most important, knowledge mobilization, team working, One Health, awareness and education, World Health, approachment, environment, interdisciplinary work. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now because the last question, it would be better addressed after the presentation. For now, we go into the last session. We enter in the last session. Let me share my screen once again. Here. Okay, for the last presentation, so it's not sharing. Okay, now, okay. This is the session regarding ecosystem health and biodiversity. We know that ecosystems are only as healthy as the wildlife that lives within them. The survival of humans and plants depends on the ecosystems. As we've seen in the previous presentations, bats and bees are essential pollinators. Small mammals maintain soil health, coral reefs, and produce oxygen and capture carbon. Fruit eaters disperse seeds, and predators help control the population of other species. It is my pleasure to introduce for this session to Marcela Huart. Marcela is an Argentine veterinarian working at the Wildlife Health Center of UC Davis, and for the last 27 years, she has focused on free-ranging wildlife research and conservation in Latin America and promoted local capacity building. Marcela is a member of the OIE Working Group on Wildlife, and she is based in Patagonia, Argentina. So now we're going to see her presentation. Maria, when you're ready. Marcela is here among us. So it's a pleasure. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I'll be discussing the importance of biodiversity for ecosystem health. I'll be presenting a few case studies that will highlight that biodiversity is essential for a healthy environment, which is in turn essential for the health of people. I'll show that the health of humans, wildlife, and the environment are interconnected, how we can have impacts on the environment that upset natural balances that alter the function of ecosystems, and how biodiversity declines can have substantial consequences on ecosystem services, but also on food production and food security. So what happens when we lose species? You have heard about Whitenose Syndrome and its immense impact on North American bats. Losing bats is a huge problem because they play key ecosystem roles. For example, they control insects, which can both be agricultural pests and vectors of disease. They are essential pollinators of many plants we eat, and they disperse seeds that sustain forests, particularly in the tropics. Without bats dispersing seeds and pollinating, we will lose half of all trees in tropical forests. Bats are also key allies for agriculture, including for wine growers. In this recent study in Chile, it was shown that bats reduce damage to grapes and significantly increase revenue per hectare for the farmers. In North America, the value of pest control and associated reduction in the use of pesticides for crops that is provided by bats has been estimated at about $53 billion per year. But not only terrestrial biodiversity matters. In the photo on the left, you can see a bloom of phytoplankton in the ocean off the coast of Patagonia where I live. Like land plants, these microscopic organisms that live in water use photosynthesis to consume carbon dioxide and release oxygen. While we recognize the relevance of forests to provide us with oxygen and regulate climate, we rarely acknowledge that nearly half of those services come from these tiny organisms in the sea. Many of you also know that wildlife are sentinels for larger environmental problems, particularly those that can have human impacts. If we're watching, they provide key early warnings that allow us to prepare for and respond to disease outbreaks and hopefully prevent human illness and death. For example, neotropical primates are well-established sentinels for yellow fever outbreaks in South America, and primate deaths have warned of Ebola outbreaks in Central Africa. A common challenge is biodiversity conservation at the wildlife-livestock interface. The case study I share here relates to an outbreak of sarcoptic mange that was linked to a government livestock incentive program that introduced domestic llama into a hotspot for native camelid conservation in Argentina. The outcome was the local extinction of the native species from this outbreak. But beyond the risk of disease transmission in both directions that must always be addressed, the most important lesson learned from this case is the need to have the agriculture and the conservation sectors talk to each other and coordinate efforts so there are no such unintended consequences. The loss of native species in a landscape usually has cascading trophic impacts, leading to ecosystem imbalances, but also leading to renewed conflict and threats to wildlife. In this case, the loss of the main prey, which are the native camelid, for both predators like the puma and the scavengers like condors, means that these species now must forage outside the park, leading to new problems such as conflicts with livestock or wildlife poisoning. Likewise, the extinction of wild wolves in Japan early on in the 20th century led to increases in populations of species like deer and wild boar that have now created a major problem for forest, agriculture, and the environment overall. The problem is so big that farmers have resorted to using robots that look like wolf to deter these pests and are considering the reintroduction of wolves to restore the ecosystem. In the veterinary profession, we rely on the use of pharmaceuticals. However, sometimes these can have unintended consequences. So many of you may know of the massive die-offs of vultures caused by the use of diclofenac in livestock, particularly in parts of Asia. Again, the cascading impacts of the loss of these environmental cleaners was dramatic, leading to increases in disease burden, particularly human rabies, from exploding populations of feral dogs that had access to massive abundance of food from remaining livestock carcasses. Fortunately for the vultures and for us all, this is a case in which action and regulations have started to yield some positive results. There is hope that where diclofenac has been banned, vulture populations may recover. The veterinary profession has also stepped in to try replacement drugs for diclofenac, and it seems like dolphaminic acid may be a safe option. This is a good reminder of the need for a One Health approach in our profession to prevent unintended consequences. Normally, we wouldn't promote wildlife conservation actions based on hands-on interventions on individual animals instead of wild populations. But in the case of gorillas, this is exactly the type of action that has saved them and the habitats they use. Here on this photo are veterinarians providing medical care to individual gorillas that are habituated for ecotourism. On the graph on the right, we can see that gorillas that are treated have higher, greater survival probabilities. So why is this important? Well, because gorillas are the umbrella species under which many others are protected. The reason this system works is because gorilla tourism brings huge economical revenues to the countries such as Uganda and Rwanda. Thus, conservation makes financial and social sense and gains traction from government and citizen sectors. You can see here how gorilla habitat is surrounded by farms and human settlements within some of the most densely populated areas in Africa. Gorilla habitat clearly wouldn't be preserved if the government and neighboring communities weren't benefiting directly from gorilla protection. To wrap up, I wanted to share a real success story in which the outcome of prevention has been measured and recognized as a success. This is about the strategy implemented in North America to prevent the introduction of BSAL, a fungal disease related to amphibian chytridiomycosis that affects salamanders. The tools used are traditional in our veterinary toolkit. This is a risk-based approach that was focused on prevention that included temporary bans on imports and large-scale surveillance, and all was coordinated by a task force that had key representation from all the relevant stakeholders. These maps show original risk estimates of BSAL introduction on the left versus the estimated risk after the implementation of the plan over a period of 5 years between 2010 and 2015 on the right. The purple circles show some areas where the highest risk has changed to a lower risk category or disappeared. From our training as vets, we know that these approaches should work, and it is wonderful to see that they effectively do when they are correctly and timely implemented. To put things into perspective, however, we should keep in mind that today, we people and our domesticated animals account for 96% of the total biomass of the earth. Yet we expect a lot of services from the small percent of wildlife that remain. In closing, I hope I made the case that biodiversity is important for ecosystem health. As veterinarians, we need to protect and advocate for healthy wildlife populations and recognize the intrinsic value of biodiversity. We also need to remember that having robust national animal health programs that incorporate wildlife is one of the main ways to manage wildlife health risk and ensure biodiversity conservation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marcela. And for the last Mentimeter question, just a minute more of your attention. So here we go. Okay. Did you enjoy global networking today and find it useful? So get ready to vote. The options are, yes, it was awesome to network. Yes, but I want to network more. Some networking is okay, or I prefer not to network. Just we like to hear what are your thoughts regarding networking. And given that is special situation that we have here, we will have to network to spread the word, to gain attention, to gain attention of decision makers. Well, 22. Okay, glad to know that most of the answers relies within positive responses to networking, because this is just the beginning. Okay, I think we can stop sharing this now. Okay. And for last but not least, we know like wildlife is a valuable asset for many communities across the world. By protecting wildlife health, we safeguard biodiversity and invest in a healthier, more sustainable future. For the next, let me share the screen first. Here. For the closing remarks, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the Director General of the OIE, Monique Eloy. Monique, the floor is yours. You're muted. Hello.
Sorry, I was mute. Is better now? I hope so.
Perfect.
So, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be with you for this closing session. And I hope that you have been interested in the intervention of the speakers. Of course, I would like first to thank them, really to warmly thank them. And I hope that you are now better informed about the activities carried out by the OIE on wild animals. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to close the webinar. And as a starting, I would like to quote
Monique, your camera, great.
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened.
Now we can hear you and see you perfectly.
Yes.
We were hearing you. Thank you.
Okay. So as I say, I would like to add a preamble of my speech. I would like to quote Mrs. Goodall. She said, every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play, and every individual makes a difference. And through her outstanding introduction, she reminds us in a humble but masterful way that wildlife is essential for life on Earth. Yes, every animal has a role to play in nature. Animals are team players, you know, because every animal is part of a community which maintains the ecosystem in balance and harmony. Some pollinate, others clean rivers, maintain forests, or clear natural areas, and also remove crops and so on. We as humans are part of the same ecosystem. Every one of us has an impact on nature, and each of us can choose to act in a way which keeps the ecosystem healthy and sustainable. And today on Wildlife Day, we celebrate wildlife and raise awareness to the importance of their health and their contribution to resilient ecosystems. We have heard from a tremendous range of speakers from across the globe, highlighting the critical role of wildlife and why it must be considered as a cornerstone in One Health. All around the world, we face multiple challenges involving wildlife health. A greater frequency of emerging disease events is accelerated by biodiversity loss and driven by the nature and frequency of interactions between humans, animals, and their environment. There is a recognition of an urgent need to strengthen the wildlife component of One Health. That is why the World Organization for Animal Health is really involved. But we are no newcomer to wildlife health. With the support of our working group, which includes world-leading wildlife experts, in a global network of national focal points and reference centers, the OIE has been working to integrate wildlife health into its policy for 30 years. However, we recognize that is not enough, certainly not enough, and that we need to be much more proactive to meet these dual goals of protecting wildlife and achieving One Health. In response, we have developed and operationalized a strategy, the OIE Wildlife Health Framework, which aims to meet these goals through action and partnerships. And of course, as Director General of the OIE, I give this my full support. We all recognize that the health of wild animals, domestic animals, humans, and the environment is inextricably linked. It is the essence of One Health. And One Health can only be achieved if everyone takes ownership. I therefore encourage you all to integrate similar objectives into your national programs. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for taking up the challenge and contributing to an healthy planet for the living beings. I thank you for your commitment. I thank you for your participation. See you soon. Back to you, Eugenia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eloa, for your kind words. And we have come to the end of 2 very productive sessions of the World Wildlife Day. Thank you for joining us today on the OIE Webinar, Global Wildlife Health, Connecting Wildlife Health Stakeholders Globally, on the occasion of the World Wildlife Day today. A special thanks to the speaker all over the globe to bring in passion and knowledge together for this occasion, and special thanks also to interpreters that brought us also together here. As we know, humans, animals, and the environment are interconnected, and the OIE is addressing those challenges involving wildlife health through the OIE Wildlife Health Framework. Do not forget to visit the webpage. Thank you very much. All the presentations and all the recordings will be available for everyone to share and spread the word and keep connecting. And goodbye. Thank you. Bye, everyone. I invite you, everyone, to turn off your videos and your mics and say goodbye and hello and start the connection now.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Good night from Tokyo.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Peru, that's right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.